Hi, it's Janet, and it's Writing Wednesday. It's May 1st, so happy spring. I even got in some flowers for the occasion. Um, and today I thought I would talk about how novels fail. I've been reading a lot of novels right now, and I keep hoping that some some people are going to come out clean, and just reading a lot of things that have problems. And the difficulty, of course, having problems with your writing is that who's going to tell you except a reviewer once the novel is done? And as we all know, that is too late to tell you what is wrong. I, um, I, um, I guess the first thing I should say is these are all contemporary novels. After working so long in the Russian Revolution, I thought I would take a look at what's going on now. These are not the prize-winning novels. I figure I'll get to them as well. But, just wanted to see what's coming out. Get a feel for the work of our time. So, if you're joining us, I'm going to be talking about how novels fails. Um, because I just read a novel that I had very high hopes for. It was holding together beautifully. It was, the writing was gorgeous. I'm not going to name names because I don't like to dissect people's work once they can't do anything about it. I only like to talk about books that I loved and I think were successful by name. So you'll never catch me trashing somebody's book unless they're dead or extremely famous, where it won't do any harm. Do no harm. First rule. All right. Well, uh, I just finished a book that I had high hopes for. It was um, a book that was extremely fine textured. Um, it reminded me a great deal of Joy Williams, whose work I love, and a small number of characters, really good landscape, really good detail, really good dialogue. This person could write so beautifully, and this is the writer's nightmare. Writing so beautifully, and I held my breath, wondering how this writer was going to pull it all together. Endings are the most difficult things to do, and the things that separate the great novels from everything else. Can they ring the big gong at the end? And even a small novel can do it. If you have a very small novel with a very small problem, nevertheless, if you have developed its themes, if you have thought about how this relates to the human condition, if you've thought very deeply about what it means. We talk about going the next step. If the novel has gone the next step, has explored kind of the footings, the foundation on which the story has risen, has taken a really good look at what does this all mean, then it's possible to pull it together and have a satisfying ending. There are so many reasons why books don't end well. And one of them is that they've not taken the next step and asked them, if my teacher, Kate Braverman, used to say, if you can have your characters think about dinner or think about God, have them think about God. And this is where you are rewarded for having done that work is when you come to pull the novel together at the end, you have somewhere to go. You can push it to the next level. And I have spent time reading a book that I thought was going to just knock it out of the park. And I just, until the last paragraph, the last chapter, I could not figure out how they were going to pull it off, but I had great faith that they would be able to. The writing was divine. And then there was nothing in the end. It just went off. There was a revelation that was not startling in any way, was not thematic because the themes hadn't been developed. And then the character leaves the scene, and that's it. And I felt so bad for this writer. It's one of those books that I will watch that writer and make sure that I will see their next book, and hopefully they will look deeper into human life on Earth and why. Why are we here? What is the nature of reality? What is the nature of accident, of coincidence? Even the landscape was so beautiful, but we never thought more deeply about landscape and place. It was definitely a novel of place that yet did not consistently go to why am I here? What is it to be from here? It scratched the surface, but it didn't go to the next level. Now we look at genre fiction, which this could ostensibly have been put in a couple of different genres. In genre fiction, probably the difference between genre fiction and literary fiction is the willingness to take that next step and ask the bigger questions. And I think this novelist that I have just read was batting for that. Was batting for to bat it out of the park, but did not do that work to take the next step. This is something you see often in work that has been done for an MFA, which is a 2-year program, maybe a 3-year program, and they might not have had time to really go in and open up the implications of things they've already said. If you are in that situation, don't rush for publication. Take another tour of your material and ask yourself, what does this mean? What have I implied about the world that I could, in some metaphor that I can open up? And does it repeat? Is there a theme going? It's not something you need to sit down and say, I'm going to write about these themes, but it's something that as you work on it, you should start being able to look down through the water, as we've talked about, look down through the water and notice a big shape that's down there. I call this raising the Titanic. Notice that you've hit a couple of notes that really were quite interesting and resonate down into more into larger issues, and see if you can raise the Titanic, get that big boat and raise it up a little bit so people can see how this fits together. You'll be able to end the book and really whack it out of the park. So I was very sad to see this book was not able to do that. It broke my heart. So a book needs to build, not just suspense, not just on the story level, but it needs to build around a central problem. People need to change. People need to see things about themselves. If you have your big change, your big moment, make it clear what the hell that means. Um, if somebody suddenly realizes that their brother is their mother or whatever, sister is their mother, take some time, unpack that thing so that in the end, when you need to bring it all to a resonant end, you're going to be able to say something about family, motherhood, inheritance, individuality, biology. You want to be able to say something that's meaningful to bring it to a resonant close. So I was just heartbroken about this book. Other books I've been reading, I thought I would talk a little bit about endings or whatever failings. I used to review for a magazine called Speak magazine, which was, I believe that was in the 90s. It was one of those very hip magazines with the type went across the photographs in white, across the photographs in like 6-point type. I don't know who could read it. It was, probably 12-year-olds who were really culturally astute. But it was new and recommended books, and I got to see a lot of books. The job was new and recommended, so every 8 weeks I had to find 6 to 8 books I would recommend, and I'm very fussy about what I would recommend. So I really had to read a lot of books. And I learned so much about writing by doing this, just quantity. That's sort of what I'm doing now. And I found that books failed in basically five different categories. The first one was they just couldn't write. And you'd be surprised, people are getting published who just don't know how to write. And God knows why these books pass muster. But, they just can't write. Perhaps the publisher thinks the subject matter alone will hold it. Well, it doesn't hold a literary reader. Then the second fault is that there's a coldness in the affect, and where it's just a game to the writer, and even somebody like Nabokov has skin in the game. I mean, there is emotion underneath his air of just playing games. You can connect. You can be outraged. You can be outraged by the character, as well as the author. But when there's a coldness, it's just somebody playing a game that it doesn't involve the reader. It's just kind of showing off. That's a fault to me. That puts it away. Then they're the character who doesn't know where the story is. There could be a remarkable number of amazing stories. I remember reading one book that had a missionary's daughter in Africa. I forgot which country. And there were the contentious non-governmental organization workers, the expats. Fabulous bunch of rabble and rascals and do-gooders and all kinds of intrigue. Fabulous. Then she was friends with the people in the local village, so there was the village head and his 4 wives, all different, all quarreling. Nobody, she could have written about that. She wrote about everything but she decided to take her subject matter, the least interesting part of her story. And that's a fault. She had a lot of good stuff, but she didn't recognize where the area of interest is. And this is one of the things that makes a writer's group really important, because a writer's group will tell you, I'm much more interested in that than this. And if you will listen to that, you will escape fault number 3. And I had that when I was trying to write about a woman living in LA, a refugee from the Russian Revolution in the 20s, and everybody wanted to hear the backstory. Liked the backstory, really liked the backstory, and so I ended up writing The Revolution of Marina M. And the new one, Chimes of a Lost Cathedral, which the galleys just came. So this is the galley. This will go out, the advanced reading copy. This will go out to reviewers, and if you want to write a review, contact my publisher, Little Brown. Isn't this gorgeous? Yes, it is. All right. So then there's the fourth flaw is what I call multiple protagonist problem, which is when you have too many main characters that are all sort of the same person. Get rid of, make people very different. Very important. And often stories with too many main characters, everybody dissolves the impact of the other people. The more you can narrow that down, the better. So multiple protagonist problem, number 4. Number 5, the ending, that they just can't pull an ending together that resonates back through the book. It's terrible to get to the end of the book and discover that the person hasn't explored the themes enough to make a resonant ending. And so that was the problem with that book that I just finished and loved. Oh, I was so sad. Then some of the, and I will, Nashana, I will get to your question in a second. Other problems of books that I've been reading recently, one book that was very beautifully written, descriptions, wonderful landscapes, a very good ability to describe gesture, emotion, mood. So in scene, very good in scene. These subtle shifts of emotion, where you go in and you're feeling, like maybe this is the man for you or something, and then little something happens that changes the mood. This person was super good at shifting emotions. It's a very difficult thing to do. People were very clear and real, which I thought was amazing, but she's telling somebody else's story. Using her protagonist does not really have any skin in the game in the situation that she's describing. It's written as if she does, but we never really believe her. We never believe the protagonist that she's really cares about this, because she is not really involved in any way. You're much better off picking a character who is directly involved in the things that they're dealing with. So the story is improbable. That cuts it right there. The improbability of the story will keep forcing the reader back, because they'll keep saying, I don't believe it, I don't believe it, I don't believe it. Yes, it is very difficult to write a book. even a bad, and these are not bad books. These were fantastic books which were flawed. All books are hard to write. But so watch these problems. If you want to get all the way to the end of the race, make sure that you're asking the big questions. Make sure that your protagonist is well chosen. Here's another one that people are very interested in this issue of do characters have to be likable? Characters who are unlikable have to have some kind of redeeming quality. If you're going to write an unlikable character, like Humbert Humbert in Lolita is a classically unlikable character. He's horrible, horrible. Actually, everybody is horrible in Nabokov. There are very few sympathetic characters in Nabokov, but they are so interesting. They're charming. They're hilariously weird, so they have other redeeming qualities. I read this book that by subject matter I should have really liked, but I found the character so tiresome. I mean, as a petulant child, the protagonist was okay, I'll accept the petulant, difficult, but funny child. But as that character grew up, I grew less and less interested in them because what is maybe tolerably funny, obnoxious in a child, over the course of a novel just becomes wearying, tedious, and unredeemed, because they were doing the same tricks as a 9-year-old or an 8-year-old that they were doing at 40. Not as interesting when you keep seeing it. So the unlikable character is not, it is not necessary that your character be likable, but they better have something else going for them. Then there's another one which I absolutely loved. As I was reading it, I thought, wow, this person's going to knock it out of the park. And we've talked about entrances and exits problem, where you spend so much time getting into something that you fail to really deliver on the scene itself. That you got to notice where the weight of the story should be. And this was a novel that it had a very interesting run-up to the main situation, interesting development of the character, but that's all, if story is cause and effect or setup and payoff, it was all set up. And when it was time to pay off, when it was time to write the middle and end of this book, they didn't have the gas to actually write the book that they had set down to write. It was all set up, and the payoff went really fast and superficially. So don't wear yourself out. If you know that it's a story about the overthrow of the American government, say, and you have a character who is going to be in the midst of that, and they are a super, super interesting character. Don't forget what your book is about, that it's about that overthrow, and you better spend enough time on the overthrow to make the novel it should be. Otherwise it's just all character development, and it doesn't make the book. It will disappoint the reader big time. It just broke my heart because it could have really done it, and it failed to do so. And so exits and entrances problem. Then I had a kind of interesting one that didn't start out very well, but just improved as it went along. Because it held and developed and thought about the bigger issues. And you can write a story about anything, if you move to the bigger issues and show how this is underpinning and informing the conflict that you've set up. So this was, it meandered through many sub-stories so it lacked propulsion until the very end. but it was well written, and my patience was rewarded with it. The good writing keeps you reading because you say, I trust this person. If they write this well, they're going to be and then, they also hit big issues. Okay, you must stay with this. And it built and built and built and delivered. And so my final verdict on this book was that it really paid off. Um, Interesting. So it ended strong, even though it wasn't a strong book all the way through. Whereas the kind of the opposite of the last book I described, which started strong and faded, um, I thought the latter one, to start off soft and slow, and then gradually it built, and I thought was, really paid off in the end. Then there was a book that really I was so angry at, I did not finish it. And that is too bad because I'm not somebody who feels that they have to finish books. I have hundreds of books to get through, and I do not finish everything I read. But this was a book that is set during a traumatic time. It's a post-apocalyptic novel, so there's lots of disaster, has happened before the novel starts. And the thing about the apocalypse is that think about what trauma is, how it feels, and how it feels to move through the world after a traumatic event. That there's a heaviness and dread and, the emotional underpinning of everything that happens is weighted by what has already happened, depending on how far back it is. But if it's a recent apocalypse as opposed to 300 years in the future or 100 years in the future, the weight of what has happened, the dread, the weight, you have to put yourself in there. Otherwise, it's just a party game. What if the world ended? What if, all these terrible things happened? What if half the United States was washed away 6 months ago? Your character is going to be so still in such a state of trauma. And how will that affect their dealing with everything that happens? Also, life is difficult in a situation like that. Don't have magical characters who can suddenly feed your character, come up with everything they need. The magical elf character. Get rid of that character. If you're going to take on the apocalypse, then do it. Do it or don't do it. Or have it 100 years in the past if you want to go there, or 25 years in the past. Because somebody recently, having sustained this kind of loss, will have lost people very close to them, will have, experienced horrors that many people just kill themselves because they do not want to go on. If your character is going on, you've got to really inhabit it. Otherwise, you get people like me getting really mad. No magical characters who do everything for your person. If they're on the black market, they've got to look for the person who has that, whatever they need. And that person is going to make demands on them. Nobody is just going to say, here, sweetie, you need a chicken? You need some gasoline? Yeah, I've got it. And, welcome to the secret hideout, No. So people get big boo-boos in literary fiction. The blows land. There's no protecting your character from problems. So those are just a few. And then somebody asked me a question here. What about a main protagonist that plays off the personality of other characters? Of course they do. Always do. But that was in terms of the multiple protagonist problem, I believe. Or getting a character who is actively involved in some way, emotionally, with the events that you want to describe. So, it's not like, oh, this my poor friend has this problem. Your protagonist then becomes a secondary character in their own story. I mean, certainly you can have an observer character, but they've got to care very, very much what goes on. We have to believe, we believed, in The Great Gatsby. We believed that our observer character, Nick, loved Daisy. Everything he wanted was represented by Daisy's world, Gatsby's world. We have to know how important it is to them. And when it isn't that important to them, there's no centrality to the urgency. We just don't enter the world that way. Let's see. There's in the book Colin Wilson, The Outsider by Colin Wilson argues fiction begins with a question you're trying to answer. Probably. You might even not be conscious of what that question is. That's probably true. I think that you're better off thinking that way than thinking, oh, I'm going to write about these two friends from high school and one of them disappears, Or, I'm going to write about, whenever it's called neck up writing, whatever really worries you, irks you, you want to write about a certain place, absolutely have at it. But watch for the question that arises. What is it? What is your attachment to this story? Why does it move you? What is it saying? That it's not just a game of one scene after another. It's not moving paper dolls. It's the themes. Do you think the themes are questions we carry with us that just keep coming back? Absolutely. That's what they are. Let's see what else we have. So anyway, and that's what keeps people coming back to your book, is that you're making comments about, you're having thoughts, bigger thoughts about the world. Then I wanted to just say something about interviewing writers. It's the season, books are coming out. Many people are doing interviews with writers or being asked to do conversations with writers, and I'm always trying to get better. Always trying to improve my interviewing skills, because part of being part of a literary community is giving your time to help other people sell their books. Why? It's not all skateboards and whipped cream. It's some of it is being of service. And so interviewing writers, reviewing books, interviewing writers is part of it. If you have a friend whose book's coming out, and see if you can find a place to review it. See if you can help interview. Would you let me interview you for my YouTube show? Absolutely, that'd be fun. So here's just some thoughts about interviewing a writer that I have compiled. And first, you read their books. If you're reading Joyce Carol Oates, it's going to be hard to get up to speed. You might want to leave that to the professionals. But if it's somebody who's just had 1 book, 2 books, 3 books, see if you could read all of them, so you can talk about their themes, so you can talk about their approach to writing. But in general, what are you looking for? You're looking for themes, things that seem to be emerging. Look at the Titanic, not just, in this scene when Bob says to blah, blah, the person who's watching or experiencing the interview hasn't read the book. So the more you can talk about these issues, the writer issues, themes that may not be immediately evident, their technique, how it's the novel is structured, the way language is used, the structure, the characterization, how people love to talk about the various characters and how they play off of each other and what they do. The world building, how I can write about LA and you can write about LA, and it's going to be two different places. So try to figure out or ask questions about how they see the place that they have developed. Look at their language. I recently interviewed a former student, Saskia Vogel, her new book, Permission. And she has two very distinct voices in the book. One is first person and one is third person, as if that first person is telling the story of the third person, but the voice was very, very different, very urgent, far less metaphor, a faster pace, and was able to talk to her about her characterization using language. It's good you might want to watch interviews with that person and see if there are certain questions that excited them or that felt kind of flat. And look at their website and look at the questions that have already been asked and see if you can find something else. Because people love, especially people who have been interviewed a lot, when they see questions that they've never seen before, when they hear somebody asking something new. It always wakes your interviewee up. It's like, wow, never even thought of that. That's the question you love. And sketch out their biography. Choose a few things you like, jot them down, and see if something sticks out for you of their biography, rather than just listing all their awards and stuff. To say something specific, maybe the first time you encountered their work, what your first idea was. Take your questions that you just as you read, jot down your thoughts about the book, or afterwards. Just jot down your thoughts and then put them in some kind of order so they flow. You first maybe want to talk about the world, and then you might want to talk about the character, and so that it seems to the audience that there is a flow to it. It's not just what else should I say, and acknowledge the answer before moving to the next question. That I recently read somewhere, and I love that. Take a moment to go, wow, thanks for that, rather than immediately, because you're nervous, you tend to jump to the next thing. Maybe not a great idea. Ask questions that cannot be answered yes or no. That's a really good idea. And invite memories, invite storytelling, invite digressions. So by ask short questions and let the writer expound, rather than I notice that sometimes you'll ask a question, and if it's too long, the person has started to formulate what they're going to say, but as you go on, they forget what they were going to say. So shorter is better, and let them digress, let them build, and change their mind and go this way and then go that way. And something I read on the internet is like, get in under the hood, like how they thought about the book as they were writing it. Like your two mechanics, like standing under the tree out on my block and looking under the hood and going, how'd you do that? You know, why'd you put that kind of a, supercharger in or whatever? So look at it writer to writer. That makes a very good interview. And then this was something I got off the internet. I love this. Before the event, read the questions over and over so that you kind of remember the order. You remember, as you're on site, you'll remember what you wanted to ask. It never occurred to me to ask to go over and over so that you don't have to be watching the whole time. And then this was something I also got off the internet, which I just love, was don't put your interviewee in the position of having to agree or disagree with something you've said, which I thought was really interesting. It never occurred to me. Would you agree that blah, 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 blah? Find a different way to say it, because many people don't want to disagree with their moderator. It's kind of interesting. And then it also, this thing on a thing I read on somebody's blog was saying, if you're on a panel, try to read the work of the other people so that you can have more of a discussion rather than waiting for your turn to come up. That's really good. And then as a moderator of panels, because it's sort of festival season, they said to ask questions some questions directed at each person on your panel and some questions for everyone. So that's really interesting. If you have a panel with people with very different books, can you think of things that they do have in common? They're both writers. Things they do have in common, questions that you could ask both of them, or all three of them, or all four of them. And then, boy, if you have a panel, I should talk about that. I should talk about that sometime. That's a big one. How to handle the mic hog, that kind of thing. And the other panelists are waiting for you, the moderator, to do something about this. We should talk about that some other time. I guess I got to think when it's difficult to be on that panel, especially if the moderator isn't stepping in. And to be interviewed, you have a new book coming out. If you have a new book coming out, how do you talk about it? And you might write down some obvious questions that you're likely to be asked and answer them. So in your own mind the story that you're going to tell about that book. So thank you very much for listening to Writing Wednesdays. And Chimes of a Lost Cathedral is getting closer to publication date, and if you would pre-order, that would be super groovy, because that's how you get on the bestseller list. It's just like movies, the opening week really counts. So if you pre-order at your local bookstore, online, wherever you shop for books, if you'd pre-order Chimes of a Lost Cathedral, that is a gift to me. If you want to exchange this gift for a little help, I'd sure appreciate it. Okay, so thank you and have a happy spring. Okay, bye.